Hey guys, this is ggDoA, and I thought we'd take a little bit closer look at all the cards for Blackrock Mountain. They've been announced, we can see all of them now, and Asa Phelps, a Redditor, has done us the kindness of compiling everything onto one image, so I'm going to use that. You can find it on the thaurissan Reddit if you want to check it out yourself as well. I'll put the link in the description to that Reddit thread. But yeah, I haven't really had a lot of time, honestly, to think a lot about these cards, so this is going to be fun for me as well, too, because it's kind of my first time really kind of sitting down and dwelling on what the possibilities of these cards could be. And I'm not going to talk a lot, I guess, about the dragon synergy, even though that's a big part of Blackrock Mountain, obviously. That would take a lot of time in itself, a lot more look at other cards that previously exist in other sets. So this is going to be a kind of a surface level, first impressions kind of thing. And so for that, and because that, it's going to be more or less sort of like a as-is judgment of these cards. So not going to get too much into the dragon synergy, although I'm sure I'll think of a few things. But either way, I think we're just going to start at the top left and move our way across. I've got the image zoomed in, so hopefully it looks pretty good. I think it should be fine. My dog is so cute. She's sleeping back there. We went for a long walk, so she's pretty tired. Anyway, so Dragon Egg. All right, so like an interesting take on the whole Nerubian egg concept, right? It's a 1 mana for a 0/2. You've got the option to possibly get two 2/1s out, although I think that's probably going to be fairly unlikely because at 2 health, it's going to be dealt with in one blow pretty frequently when it comes out. It's even easier to deal with than things like Acolyte of Pain and stuff like that, than Armorsmith. So I think if you're going to want to get 2 whelps out of this, you're going to have to produce a way to activate it yourself, because I don't think it's going to be very often where your opponent's going to only be able to do 1 damage to it. So that's something that I think you're going to want to think a lot about if you're going to put this card in the deck, in any of your decks. I think it's a decent card, though. I could see myself using it. Here's the thing. I really want to play Aggro Warrior. I really, really want to. And I've always wanted to. But it's just never worked that well. I mean, yeah, we've had a couple decks here and there that have gotten wins. Obviously, you know, Kranish, the Korean player, had his Raging Worgen deck. A lot of people have run Raging Worgen decks. There's a Mech Warrior, which is kind of silly, but it does work to a certain degree on the latter. But I think that maybe these cards that are coming out might possibly give Aggro Warrior a little bit more of a chance. So I'm going to be trying it, of course. I'll probably stream it too, and we'll see how miserably I fail with that. But Dragon Egg, maybe would consider putting that in there. Otherwise, it's a possibility for things like Zoo as well, although I think, honestly, this would work possibly a little bit better in Warrior, because you do have so many things that do 1 damage to your own minions, right? And remember, I think we're probably going to need to activate this ourselves if you want to get 2 whelps instead of just 1, right? So we'll see how it goes, but I think it's got a possibility. 2/1 is of course very weak, but you know, getting it essentially, you know, for free is always a huge thing to consider in Hearthstone. Moving on, Blackwing Technician, 3 mana for a 2/4 with a battle cry. If you're holding a dragon game, +1/+1. If you're playing a dragon deck, this is going to be in it. No reason why you wouldn't want to include this. It's a very easily coined out 3/5. If you've got the coin and you've got a dragon deck. It's just a lot of bang for its buck, right? It's very good for its mana cost. And 3 mana for a 2/4, even if you don't get the battle cry, it's not great, but it's not the worst ever. It doesn't become like horribly inefficient. So I think you know, if you play dragons, it's going to be in there. And that's about it. That's pretty much about it. It doesn't really have any other qualities to it. 4 health, 5 health is nice. And we see a lot of stuff moving into the 5 health category, it seems like, in this set. And with a lot of things doing 4 health these days, or doing 4 damage, like Piloted Shredder, you know, a True Silver Champion, things like that, Death's Bite, it seems like the health totals are starting to creep up a little bit. And just as an aside, it seems like Blizzard is sort of moving towards a game where minions stay out longer, and I'm actually happy to see that, because one of my biggest complaints with Hearthstone originally was that it really felt a lot of times like you'd play your guy and then they would have to find a way to remove it and play their guy, then you'd remove it and play your guy. And so if somebody got a minion that stayed out, you'd get a larger advantage than you really should in a lot of CCGs. And that's gone away a lot in GVG, but it looks like Blizzard wants to move farther away and give minions a chance to kind of stay out on the board, which is great, because my dream Hearthstone game, right, is where there's a lot of minions for both sides. People have to think really hard about how they trade, how they use their spells. I think it makes the game a lot more interesting. So I'm happy to see this focus on higher health, you know, overall. It's pretty cool. So just in conclusion, Blackwing Technician, if you make a dragon deck, it's going to be in it. Dragonkin, sorcerer. Whenever you target this minion with a spell, gain +1/+1. So 4 for a 3/5. Alright, so again, you know, not absolutely terrible for mana-wise. 4 for 3/5 isn't too bad at all. The tricky part is targeting it with a spell. You know, obviously this card would then lend itself more towards priest, paladin, things where you're going to be, you know, buffing your own creature. It could see use, you know, potentially in shaman as well, I suppose, because you have things like rockbite or weapon. But they've thrown kind of an interesting curve at us where you have to target it yourself. It's not just like the Trog thing where when a spell is cast, the spell has to target the minion. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one gets used. Obviously, Blizzard with the stream just you know, 12 hours ago, less than 12 hours ago, had a Paladin Dragon deck that they felt was a good way to go with dragons, and Dragonkin Sorcerer fits in extremely well with that. So yeah, I think Paladin Priest could see some use. Maybe other decks too. I mean, Rogue obviously has a lot of creature buffing as well. It's not the fastest creature ever. You know, 4 for 3/5. It doesn't put a huge amount of pressure the turn you put it down. So it's not the strongest, like, you know, on curve type of card. But I think it could certainly see some use. We'll see. It's like hit or miss. It depends on how well the dragon decks do overall. If dragon decks are good, then we're gonna see, you know, well, obviously a lot of these, right? But if they kind of fail, this one's going to be a little bit tougher to include, so we'll see what happens. Hungry Dragon, 4 mana for 5/6, Battlecry, summon a random 1-cost minion for your opponent. Initially, this looks very, very good. It's a 4 for a 5/6. The drawback doesn't seem that bad. A 1 mana cost minion. When you really start to think about it, though, there are a lot of extremely scary 1-cost minions in Hearthstone. And, you know, a good amount of taunt as well. I believe there was another infographic on Reddit showing dragon synergies, and they said with this card it's about an 8% or so chance to get a taunt, which is fairly high. So if you're getting a 5/6, a 1-mana taunt isn't like the biggest concern ever. I mean, Voidwalker is a bit annoying. Goldshire Footman is negligible, right? Sorry, Twitter account. But it's still a good card. I think a lot of people are going to be playing around with it. I certainly intend to use it a lot. It all kind of depends. If you give your opponent a Dust Devil, you know, for free, remember the Dust Devil, the 3/1 with Windfury that nobody plays in Shaman? If you give your opponent that and have no way to sort of respond, well, then that's 6 damage potentially coming at you. So Hungry Dragon could backfire in a pretty big way, but we'll see how it all kind of shakes out. Obviously, there's Flame Imp, a solid body that can come out in response to a 5/6. But I think overall, it's definitely worth trying, and it could be a very strong card in Hearthstone overall. We'll see what happens with it. Blackwing Corruptor. Okay, 5 for a 5/4. Battlecry, if you're holding a dragon, deal 3 damage. So again, the dragon synergy in there as well. And, you know, 5 for a 5/4 isn't the greatest on its own. You know, it's the same as like Harrison Jones, obviously. And it's very situational. If you're holding a dragon, you can do this damage. A lot of dragon decks that we've seen sort of theorize so far include some more of the expensive ones. So in that situation, you would have one in your hand that you wouldn't be playing anyway, and it would be there to sort of activate a lot of these types of cards. So it could see use. I'm not totally sold on it. In competitive play, again, I don't think dragon decks are going to be really, really strong, like, you know, meta-breakingly strong. They could see some play, and maybe you would include this guy, but I think out of a lot of the Dragon Synergy cards, this is probably one of the ones that's a little bit less likely, just because vanilla, it's not that great. You know, again, 4 health right now is very easily removed with a lot of different minions and weapons and things like that, so, you know, Crackle, stuff like that. So I think it depends on how consistently you can use the Battlecry. And if someone can make a deck that can consistently do that, sure, you can improve him, or you can include him, rather. But I just don't know if that's going to be something that people are able to do right off the bat. So we'll keep an eye on him, but I'm not expecting him to see a ton of play right away. I'm just going to scroll over a little bit here. Yep, looks like it's going okay on the stream, or on the recording, rather. Grim Patron. This is a card that I'm fairly excited about, actually. He's kind of expensive. but he's potentially, very devastating. Obviously, if anyone has played World of Warcraft and has been in this instance with the Grim Patrons, they just like keep coming at you and never stop. That's what it feels like anyway. You can get overwhelmed very quickly, and that's the idea behind this card. We saw that happen in the Blizzard stream that they did for the I almost said GVG reveal, but the Blackrock Mountain reveal about a day ago, a little bit less than a day ago. And so Grim Patron, he's expensive, but I really want to play around with him, especially in Aggro Warrior. I really want to try it out. And so I've got my fingers crossed. We'll hope he does well, but if there's going to be anything that sort of prevents him from being used, it's that he's 5 mana for a 3/3. 3 health is easily removed, so it's going to be a situation where it's going to be a lot better against certain classes than others. If he was 4 mana, I think he'd be fantastic. 5 mana, I'm going to try him out. We'll see how he goes. Could get cut, but I'm really excited about this card. I really want him to work badly. Moving on, Draconid Crusher, 6 mana for a 6/6. Battlecry if your opponent has 15 or less health, gain +3/+3. So, again, 6 mana for a 9/9. Yeah, that's really strong. If you're running an aggro deck, you're going to have them ideally around that health total, maybe a little bit less by the time you get to the 6 mana turn. So, in theory, you can see situations where you can put this guy out and he closes the game out for you. Unfortunately for Draconid Crusher here, there's a card called Big Game Hunter, there's Power Word Death. There's a lot of ways to deal with this, and so then if we take away the battle cry, and we acknowledge that anything obviously with 7 attack or higher is generally easily dealt with in the meta right now, you have to look at it vanilla, right? And then it's a 6/6 for 6. And then he's not really even as good as Abyssal, what's the name of it? The 6/6 for 6 that does 1 damage to everything. The Warlock Demon. An Abyssal, yeah. So he's not, he's not even as good as that, right? So I'd be very hesitant to include him in anything. I think he's going to be really strong in Arena. I think that's going to be a card you'll want to pick up if you're going to be playing Arena in Blackrock Mountain. In Constructed, I don't think we're going to see it used a whole lot. He is a dragon, so there is that synergy to sort of consider here, but he's a very expensive dragon as well, too. 6 for 6/6. And in a lot of these other more mid-range decks, and even moving towards the control a little bit more, the 6 mana slot is a very highly contested slot. That's where you've got your, Black Knight, your Sylvanas, things like that. So it's going to be tough to fit him in, even if you do want to use him in a lot of existing archetypes. So we'll see. I don't think this guy's going to get used a lot. I think he could be good in Arena. Let's move on. Volcanic Drake. I almost said Violent Drake. He probably is fairly violent too, but Volcanic Drake is the name of the card. 6 for a 6/4. So he's a little bit weak, a little bit on the weak side health-wise, but he costs 1 less for each minion that died this turn. So that's interesting. Obviously, it's a mechanic that's being used quite a bit in Blackrock Mountain. It seems like things being less expensive for the number of creatures that died this turn, or minions, I should say, that died this turn. At 6 mana, though, it's still going to be fairly expensive. You're going to need to create a situation where you're going to be trading a lot of what's already on the board. It doesn't synergize very well with spells, obviously. If you think about it, and if you want to make him free, perhaps, and you're playing him in Druid, just as like a total off the top of my head example, you would be doing like Force of Nature, and you'd have to kill everything and have all your treants die in a even 3 for 3 trade. Then he'd be 0. You could play him and have a 6/4 out, and then he gets swiped immediately the next turn. So it's another one of those things where 4 health makes him fairly risky. So I know people are really excited about this, and there is the potential where if you're playing an aggressive deck, that you'll be able to get him out very quickly at a time in the game, at an early turn where 4 health is not easily dealt with. I think that's really where the niche is going to be for the Volcanic Drake. Right now, I'm just really worried about anything with 4 health as far as removal goes. I feel like that's a dangerous spot to be in right now in Hearthstone. So I think people are going to use him. I'm certainly going to try him in things like Zoo and stuff like that. I think it could work out very well, but it's kind of one of those time will tell things, right? Are we able to create enough situations where there's enough trading going on to make this guy cost efficient, right? The other thing to consider too is that if you are playing an aggressive deck and you want to put this out quickly, then you're going to be, going to face a lot, right? You're going to try to put the pressure on them to remove your minions rather than, you removing the minions. So by including this guy in an aggressive deck, I think sometimes you're going to be running into the situation where you're going to be playing a little bit counter to what your deck is supposed to do, depending on the deck. So that's something to kind of consider as well. Do you want to trade heavily where you could instead go to face and potentially make them trade into you, just for the trade-off of putting down a 6/4? I'm not sure that's worth it. So I think it's going to be tried a lot. I'm certainly going to experiment with it, but I could see it ending up not being that great. Slide back over to the left. And so now we're getting into some of the neutral legendaries. Exciting stuff, right? So Emperor Thaurissan. And, the thing is this is a cool expansion because I played a lot of World of Warcraft and, being in Blackrock Mountain, being in the instances that were in Blackrock Mountain. If you're not familiar with it, Blackrock Mountain is kind of like a big sort of volcanic mountain, right, in the game. And within that mountain are several different instances with different bosses and different themes and things like that. And so that's where the different themes for the wings of this Hearthstone expansion are coming from. It's the different instances in, Blackrock Mountain. So should be pretty cool to see. Just as like a WoW nerd, I'm excited about it, so that's fun. So anyway, Emperor Thaurissan, one of the big bosses in one of the Blackrock Mountain instances. 6 for a 5/5 at the end of your turn, reduce the cost of cards in your hand by 1. Wow, that's really, really good. 6 for a 5/5, pretty standard these days. That's Sylvanas, etc. So I think this guy could certainly see a lot of use. I mean, reducing the cost of everything in your hand by 1 in a slower deck and like a control deck is extremely strong. It can help you pick up potentially a significant amount of tempo as well. So I think it goes without saying that this looks like a card that could be very, very good for a lot of different decks. Again, it's that pretty highly contested 6-mana spot, so what are you going to take out to put him in? That's going to be something that people are going to have to wrestle with a little bit, but a lot of people are going to be using this guy, especially in slower decks. He's not going to be the greatest in, aggro, obviously, because once you get to that 6-mana turn, do you really need your cards to be any less expensive? You should be able to pretty much drop your hand from turn 6 on, right? If you're playing something like Zoo or Face Hunter or something like that. So he's going to be going in some of the more slower, higher cost decks. And in that situation, I think he could do really well. We'll have to keep an eye on it. So moving on, Rend Blackhand, a highly debated card right now. 7 for an 8/4. If you're holding a dragon, destroy a legendary minion when he comes into play. So it's a battle cry that does that. In the stream, again, I'm going to reference the Blizzard stream a lot because this is the only time so far that we've seen Blackrock Mountain get played. In that, they got a surprising amount of Rend Blackhand battle cries off. However, obviously these were decks tailored to use these cards. They were games tailored to make this kind of thing happen. So you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. But it does make one kind of wonder, right? Obviously, Rend Blackhand is the most fragile legendary like ever, pretty much. He's vulnerable to Big Game Hunter on the one hand, on the power side, and on the health side, he's only got 4, so he's also very vulnerable again to like a lot of the 4 removal stuff, swipe, etc., right? So yeah, you're going to kill a legendary minion, but he's probably not going to stay out. I would have rather seen him be something like a 5/5, or like a 5/6 or something like that. 8/4 just seems to make him exceptionally vulnerable, and the reason for that is because you're killing a legendary minion when he comes into play, right? So by getting a vulnerable minion here, you do sort of get a big trade-off in that you remove potentially a game-ending threat on their side. So, is it worth it or not? Again, it's got that dragon synergy, so it's going to have to be in a dragon deck. I could see people using it in dragon decks and slower ones, like the Paladin one that we saw today on the Blizzard stream. But just all in all, the attack and health on this guy just makes me really uncomfortable, and I think a lot of other people are feeling that as well too. But it's intentional. It's not like Blizzard didn't realize that this guy was going to be extremely fragile when they made him. He's made to kill a legendary, and so the trade-off is that he's easily killed himself too. It's very intentional. The only question is, will it be useful in competitive play? And I'm not so sure. Moving on, Chromaggus. 8 mana for a 6/8. Whenever you draw a card, put another copy in your hand. It's pretty cool. I like it. He's not vulnerable to Big Game Hunter. He's got a big amount of health. And when you get to these later game stages, if you can double the cards you draw, get copies of it, that is really strong. So I'm kind of curious about using this guy in Control Warrior, perhaps, because, a lot of times in Control Warrior you go to Fatigue, Priest, Paladin as well. Any more heavier control deck, I think you could see some decent use in. Now, the tricky thing is that you're not going to be able to use his ability until your next turn in most cases. If you're playing him on curve at 8 mana, you know, you're not going to be drawing any more cards for the rest of that turn unless you have something that already exists in play that's going to allow you to do that. So I think you're going to need to be very careful to play around their removal if you're going to be using him. The nice thing is that he's not really vulnerable to a lot of removal, he's got a good chance out of a lot of legendaries to live until your next turn, and you know, again, that's intentional too. They want you to be able to use that ability, and with a 6/8, that's still a very strong body on the board. I think for the ability he grants you, the stats are perfectly fine. I think 8 mana is a perfectly decent cost for that. So a really intriguing legendary, and probably one of the ones I'm most excited about from Blackrock Mountain. So going to be trying him out in some control decks for sure. So moving on to Majordomo Executus. And yeah, Majordomo, of course, a fight that everyone in Molten Core dreaded. It was not the most fun ever. 9 mana for a 9/7. Replace your hero with Ragnaros the Firelord. And yes, we saw this happen in the Blizzard stream as well. What happens, if you're not familiar with this, when you are replaced, it's sort of a Jaraxxus-esque switch where you become Ragnaros. And so when you become Ragnaros, you go down to 8 health, and then your hero power becomes pay 2 mana, do 8 damage to a random enemy, right? So you basically get the Ragnaros end of turn ability, you know, once a turn at any time, right? You just pay 2 mana like a hero power. Now, the risk, obviously, here is that you're down to 8 health. And 8 health right now in Hearthstone is very, very, very easily bursted by many different classes. So, if you're going to play this guy, you're going to need to do it in a situation where when you become Ragnaros, you're ready to end the game, like, right there. Because you're not going to last too long. Now, Ben Brode on Twitter did confirm that if you become Ragnaros and then you Alexstrasza yourself, your health total will go up to 15, so you'll be able to get up to a maximum 15 health with that. So that's an unlikely scenario, but it's nice to kind of know that exists. I don't really think this guy is going to be used too much in competitive play. I think he's very, very risky. I think people are going to be a little bit sad maybe when he comes out of a Sneasel Shredder because it might just kill you. But it's a cool card. A 9/7 is certainly not a body on the board to, you know, laugh at either. Of course, he's vulnerable to Big Game Hunter and all that good stuff as well too. But you know, he's okay cost wise. But yeah, that Ragnaros, being Ragnaros is cool, but I just don't think you want to be Ragnaros in most cases. So I don't think this guy's going to be used in competitive play too much. We'll see. Maybe I'll go back to this video in the month and I'll be totally wrong. But I don't think it's going to be about Majordomo Executus. Moving on, Nefarian, 9 for an 8/8. Battlecry, add 2 random spells to your hand from your opponent's class, which is really cool, actually. It's a very interesting Battlecry, very neat. It's sort of Thoughtsteal-esque, only you can only steal spells instead of cards in their deck. 9 for an 8/8. That's kind of what makes me a little bit uncomfortable, honestly, because we're talking about a 9 mana dragon here. And I can't think of a situation where I would rather include Nefarian in my deck as a 9 mana dragon card, or a 9 mana legendary for that matter, over Ysera or Alexstrasza. When you look at his ability, he's an 8/8. He's very vulnerable to removal, of course, even though he has a strong body by himself. The Battlecry could completely backfire against a lot of classes. You know, if you think about it, like, Warrior is going to be probably the best class to play this guy with, because you're going to have the best chance of effectively using any of the spells you steal. So I think he's going to be kind of a fun gimmicky card. I'm sure he's going to, you know, result in like a lot of pretty funny YouTube clips, but I don't think he's going to be in competitive. Again, just based purely on the fact that Alexstrasza is there, but more than anything, I would never in a million years include this guy in my deck over Ysera. There's just no benefit that Nefarian provides that Ysera doesn't give me more of. You know, Ysera is going to stick around more. She's going to give me cards that I know are going to be useful, unless they're Laughing Sister. And it's much less randomness, right? And so when you're looking at the competitive side of things, the more you can reduce the random chance, the higher chance you're going to have to win the game. So Nefarian is cool. I think it's a neat battle cry. Not going to be used in competitive play. So now, moving on to the class cards. It's going to be Druid first, I guess. 3 mana for a 2/2. Druid of the Flame. Choose one. You get a 5/2 minion or a 2/5 minion. So, okay. Interesting. 5/2 is obviously extremely vulnerable at 3 mana. It's going to die really, really quick. You're probably not going to get to attack with it. 2/5 could be something a little bit more useful. Overall, I'm not terribly impressed with this card. The thing that kind of makes me a little bit curious, though, is that you have these Druid decks or these Druid decks that I make and are bad, but I like to make aggressive buffing Druid decks from time to time, and this card could fit fairly well into that. You know, you could use that and buff it and get a fairly strong creature for a fairly efficient-ish mana cost. But again, you know, I mean, 2/5 just doesn't give you a lot of board presence. 5/2 just, you know, will die very quickly. So neither one of these options is terribly strong. If it was like a 4/3 and a 3/4, that would be a little bit more interesting. But it is a common. You know, I mean, sometimes you just have to look at the rarity as well too. And yeah, I mean, you can say, well, Blackrock Mountain, who cares about rarity, right? It's not like you're buying packs of this. You're going to get the card regardless. But in terms of quality for rarity, as a common, I think that's what you're going to be kind of expecting. So it's an interesting card, but I'm just not terribly impressed with it. But again, you know, this is sort of, right now I'm just sort of giving you my initial top of my head, you know, just off the top of my head, responses to these. So as I think about the synergies more with Druid, you know, maybe I'll want to give it a try. We'll see. So moving on, Volcanic Lumberer, 9 mana for a 7/8 with Taunt, costs 1 less for each minion that died this turn. So, you know, again, this is going to be a guy where you're going to need to set up a big trade on the board to make him affordable, right? And so if you think about where Druid is at, you are going to run into situations, I feel, where you're going to have 3 relatively strong minions on the board, and you can trade them in, reduce this guy to 6, maybe play him on turn 6 as a 7/8 taunt. Pretty good, right? He's still vulnerable to Big Game Hunter, though. And, you know, again, with the amount of removal in Hearthstone, with the usual situation where you don't have the ability to trade that heavily, as this guy implies, I just think it's going to be a consistency issue, you know, where it's going to be hard to sort of find a time to play him. So, again, you know, I'm not terribly thrilled anyway, but I'm not a big fan of Druid in general, so I'm kind of like, meh, Druid cards, whatever. But this guy, yeah, I mean, at 9 mana, the trades you're going to need to set up, it's going to be hard to fit him in a way that sort of furthers what you're trying to do with your deck, right? I mean, that's kind of the big thing is yeah, you can totally set up situations where you can play this guy very cheaply, but does that fit with the theme you're trying to accomplish in your deck? And looking at the Druid decks we have right now, I'm not so sure. You know, if he was a little bit cheaper and like a 6/8 or something like that, if he wasn't vulnerable to Big Game Hunter, I think he could maybe find some use in some combo decks, because, you know, obviously with combo decks, what you want to do is get minions that stay out on the board so that you can buff them with Savage Roar. So, yeah, I'm just not so sure about this guy. We'll move on. We'll see how he goes, but I don't think he's going to be in a whole lot of decks. Scrolling on down, it's time for Hunter cards, and Blizzard has decided, the decision has been passed down, that Hunter will be Face Hunter from here on out. That's it. Sorry, guys. Mid-range was a nice experiment. Control, yeah, in your dreams, right, man? It's going to be Face. Now you actually are forced to remove all of your hand as fast as you can. That's what Blizzard wants you to do, apparently, with these 2 cards. 2 mana, quick shot, deal 3 damage, but if your hand is empty, draw a card. So, obviously a great Face Hunter card. 2 mana for 3 damage is, you know, it's a Frostbolt with potentially a draw. So by itself, it's you know, more or less a Frostbolt without the freezing, which is great. And being able to draw a card with your hand empty, which is a fairly common occurrence with Hunter, I think it should be at least tried in every Face Hunter deck right now. The thing is that if you're battling for board position early on as Face Hunter, a lot of times you're going to need to use this before your hand is empty, and you're not going to get the draw out of it. So, you know, if you play with Face Hunter, I'd say be prepared to not get the draw, but it's still 3 damage for 2 mana. That's not so bad. You know, and it's more endgame burst as well, too. So I think it's going to be a card that's probably going to be used a lot in Hunter, and you know, probably more towards the Face variation, because that's the type that burns through its hand quickly. And this is what Blizzard wants, guys. This is what they want, I guess. Core Rager, 4 mana for a 4/4. He's cost efficient. You want the mana cost to be equal to the power and toughness, which it is here. Battle Cry If your hand is empty, gain +3/+3. That would bump them up to a 7/7. Kind of a little bit bigger version of, or a smaller version of this guy, Draconid Crusher, right? Just a little bit different with a big buff based upon a situation in the game. So a 7/7 for 4 obviously is great. It's very cost efficient. It's a huge body. Unfortunately, it's still vulnerable to big game hunter. Are you noticing a trend here that I'm saying a lot of, unfortunately, it's vulnerable to big game hunter, and that's something that I've been sort of thinking a lot about. That's a whole different topic, right, of course, and many people have already done videos and articles about it too, but big game hunter really does limit the viability of a lot of these cards, because if you've got a card that's going to die to big game hunter the turn you play it, then it really needs to do something that benefits you right then, right? Ragnaros hits people. Dr. Boom gives you boom bots. Sylvanas, well, is not vulnerable to big game hunter. You get the idea, right? It's something where you need to get a benefit out of it the turn you put it in. Alexstrasza, change a life total. Core Rager, you play it for cheap, but you're not going to get a benefit out of it if they BGH it, right? So that is sort of the binary thing that a lot of people have been are looking to decide if they're going to include a minion with potentially 7 attack in their deck. So yeah, I think it's cool. I like the idea of having to empty your hand to activate these things. I think it's really cool to sort of force yourself to play really fast and be crazy and aggressive. I love aggression. It's a fun way to play, but again, I think Core Rager just doesn't give you enough immediate benefit for the vulnerability that he has, potentially. Because if you use a turn playing him, dies right away, well, you've pretty much just given your opponent, two turns in a row in exchange for playing a 4/2. So it's not the greatest thing. Let's move on to the Mage cards. 5 mana for Dragon's Breath. Deal 4 damage, costs 1 less for each minion that died this turn. So it's that mechanic again. So it again, depending on the trades, depending on how much dies, obviously it could be very efficient, or it could be an extremely inefficient card as well too. So this is one where, if you're already, think about, just as an example, and this may not be the most optimal example to include this card, but just as an example, think about Mech Mage, right? If you're going to be trading in a turn with Mech Mage, then you're going to be running into a situation where there's not going to be a lot out on the board to use this on, right? And so you're going to have to do it to face. And just straight up damage to face early on in the game isn't really the greatest. So it's a bit awkward in that scenario. I think that potentially something in a very slow direct damage freeze mage could work a bit better for Dragon's Breath. And I've always been messing around with direct damage only mage decks. I loved playing direct damage decks in Magic the Gathering back in the day. You play a little blue-red there, and you're able to just not really worry about minions, just do damage to face and control the board. And mage can obviously do that, and I think this card could help. It could be a nice benefit to that. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Obviously, Flame Strike makes this card very cheap, potentially. So it's a card that deserves some experimenting with. I'm kind of curious about it. I'm probably going to bring back the old 100% direct damage Freeze Mage deck. And, a lot of people have been playing Freeze Mage. I built one in the first week of the beta and made a video on it like way, way back when. But I wanted to take it a step further. I've always wanted to make a minionless deck, pure direct damage and board control. And so this might help out a little bit with that. Moving on to Flamewalker, 3 mana for a 2/4. After you cast a spell, deal 2 damage randomly split among all enemies. So kind of a cool card. I like it. It's interesting. And it may fit in, I know I said no minions, but this may fit in a little bit with the direct damage aspect of things as well too. I think this guy is going to be potentially valuable in things like mid-range mage, where you're playing secrets, where you're playing like, coin and Frostbolt, Ice Lances, things like that. Obviously, anything with a lot of spells he could work well in to help you control the board a bit more. So I think he's going to certainly see some play, and I think he could potentially work pretty well. I'm excited about this card. I'm gonna try it out for sure. All right, moving on to Paladin. Solemn Vigil, more minions dying. 5 mana, draw 2 cards, cost 1 less for each minion that died this turn. So again, this is a situation where if you're playing a very aggressive deck, which a lot of Paladin decks can be. You know, we've seen Face Paladin many, many times. We've seen variations on the Divine Shield Paladin that focuses on trading efficiently while using the Divine Shields to keep your minions alive. You could potentially see fairly good efficiency out of that card with this. Obviously, if you are able to kill 3 minions, you can draw 2 cards for 2 mana. That's great. That's an absolutely fantastic thing. So, yeah, we could see this used, but you have to consider that Divine Favor already exists in the game, and if you're going to be playing an aggressive Paladin deck, a lot of times you're going to be going to face and just playing Divine Favor anyway, because they're going to have more cards in your hand, and you're going to be sort of racing them that way. So I kind of question if this card will be more useful than Divine Favor would be. I think this card is going to be tried out a bit more in maybe mid-range and control. But again, it's a card that deserves experimentation, and we'll see what happens with it. So yeah, I'm just trying to, again, this is just like my initial first thoughts ever about these cards. So if it seems a bit scattered, sorry, I just like to record kind of what I'm thinking. Yeah, I'll try it out. I still think I like Divine Favor a little bit better, but we'll see. Dragon Consort, 5 for a 5/5. Battle Cry, the next dragon you play costs 2 less. So if you're going to play a dragon deck, you're going to play Dragon Consort. It's mana efficient. It makes your other cards cheaper. Dragon Paladin is something that I think, again, I talked about this earlier, Dragon Priest, Dragon Paladin. I think these are the 2 classes Blizzard had in mind with a lot of the dragons that we're seeing in this expansion. So this is just part of that. Not really a whole lot more to say about it. It's, if you're going to play Dragon Paladin, you're going to have 2 Dragon Consorts. That's how it is. Moving on, Priest, Twilight Whelp, 1 mana for a 2/1. If you're holding a dragon, gain +2 health. So it's a little bit like Witch Doctor, right? 1 mana for a 2/1, gain 2 health. Only this one has a requirement that you are holding a dragon. So aside from the fact that it is a dragon and you have the dragon synergy, it's not terribly great on its own, and it's not give something 2 health. It's just gain 2 health, as in you, the player, gain 2 health. You can't heal another minion or something like that. If you could heal another minion, that'd be fantastic. But as is, I don't think it's the greatest card, but if you're going to play Dragon Priest, you're probably going to put it in there anyway, just for the synergy, and to get, a little bit of power out on the board early on. So, interesting card. It's just a Dragon Priest card, that's all. Not going to really be used outside of that. Moving on, Resurrect. This one is interesting. 2 mana, summon a random friendly minion that died this game. Now that is a scary card to consider with Priest, because if you think about it, if you're playing, a mid-range Priest, if you're going even for the Control Priest, what sort of stuff is going to come back here? Akanai Soul Priest, Northshire Cleric, Dark Cultist, Injured Blade Master. These are things that can make a big difference coming back for 2 mana. So this is definitely a card that Priests are going to want to try out for a little bit, especially more of the minion mid-rangey sort of based Priests. Hey, you missed that Sludge Belcher that just died? Well, bring him back potentially for 2 mana. It's a card that I think in general is going to be very good, just because of the minions that are used in Priest right now. Yeah, I think that's going to be a really good card. Not a whole lot else to say with that. I think it's going to be one that a lot of people are going to include. Yeah. So, moving on, it's Rogue time. All right, just making sure everything's still on screen. It is great. Okay, so Gang Up, 2 mana, choose a minion, shuffle 3 copies of it into your deck. So this is really interesting. I would assume it means choose a minion on the board. I haven't seen any clarification yet. If it's out there, I've missed it. So I'm going to assume, for the sake of the analysis right now, that this means choose a minion on the board. And obviously, this could be extremely good. Now, you don't get it in your hand. It is shuffled into your deck. But putting 3 of something in your deck while a game is already in progress gives you a pretty strong chance to draw it when you consider that Hearthstone is a base 30-card deck game. So I think this is going to be a really fun card to play around with for things like, maybe Backspace Rogue can make a little bit of a comeback. I think especially in Aggression, if you can get a lot of those charge minions back, it could be good. It could be really good. So I think it's going to be something people are going to play around with. Again, we'll see if people decide that it's consistently good enough. That's the real key there, is if you can create a deck where you'll consistently be getting cards you want. But where you can choose things on the board, I'm assuming, I think it's going to be really worth considering. So yeah, probably going to see that get used. Moving on, Dark Iron Skulker, 5 mana for a 4/3 battlecry, do 2 damage to all undamaged enemy minions. Well, you know, he's not mana efficient. 4/3 for 5 mana is not great, but dealing 2 damage to all of the undamaged enemy minions, a la backstab, is a very interesting thing to kind of think about. And with the way that rogue decks play right now, you're pretty much either killing a minion or you're not. You're not going to be doing a lot of damage to minion and just sort of, you know, leaving it sit there unless you've needed to use a Blade Flurry in an emergency situation and you know, like, one minion, like their Quartermaster, is going to survive with 1 health or something like that, right? So I think he could be fairly beneficial. Again, 2 damage isn't the greatest. You know, I don't know if Rogue needs a lot of help against classes like Shaman per se. So it all kind of depends on if players feel that he's necessary to include. You know, and at 5 mana, that's a card slot that is tough to sort of take up with something that if you can't get a benefit from the battle cry on it, you're just ending up with a cost inefficient creature. So I'm not so sure about Dark Iron Skulker. You know, on the surface, it seems very strong, right? Doing 2 damage to enemy minions, that's huge. That seems very strong. But when you really think about the implementation in a lot of the rogue decks that exist right now, and we could see, you know, differences to those decks, obviously, once Blackrock Mountain comes out, that make this guy a little bit more viable. I just think for his cost, he's a little bit, you know, he's not going to make a big difference. Not as big of a difference as people think he is. We'll see. I could be wrong, but I'm not so sure about Dark Iron Skulker. I don't think he's going to find a place right away in decks. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. I've been playing Mech Rogue lately, which has been really, really fun. So that's totally unrelated. I just like Mech Rogue. I just wanted to say that. So moving on to Shaman, 4 mana for the Fireguard Destroyer. He is a 3/6, gain 1 to 4 attack, overload 1. So think of it this way. Overload obviously makes this card cost 5 mana overall. The difference is that you're paying 4 mana initially and then another 1 mana next turn. But it is 5 mana overall. And his battle cry will gain him a minimum of 1 attack up to a maximum of 4 attacks. So at minimum, when you play him, he will be a 4/6. So a 4/6 for 5 mana, is on the edge of not being the greatest mana efficiency wise. A vanilla 4/6 is not great. If he becomes a 5/6 for 5, okay, now we're talking. Interesting. If it becomes a 6/6 for 5, that's sounding pretty good to me right now. Yeah. So it's one of those cards where it's not terrible if you get the worst case scenario battle cry. It's really not, especially with cards like Lava Shock that we're going to talk about in a moment. So I think he's worth considering. I think it's worth considering playing. Minimum 4/6, 4 mana that initial turn. Yeah, I think if you look at if you play the odds, I think you're going to probably win a lot with Fireguard Destroyer. I think he's going to be a fairly solid body on the board. There's not a whole lot contesting the 4 mana spot for Shamans right now, I believe. You've got like Pilot Shredder. What else? Yeah, not a whole lot. People aren't playing the unstable elemental anymore. Is that what's called? 2/4? That gains stuff when you play overload stuff. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Oh wait, he's 3 mana, isn't it? Man, I don't play a lot of Shaman either. But anyway, Fireguard Destroyer, I think he's going to be decent. Give him a try. Moving on to Lava Shock, a very exciting card. 2 mana to do 2 damage. Unlock your overloaded mana crystals. And I believe it's been clarified too that when you play this card, any overload you accrue in the remainder of the turn is going to not be locked either. So in theory, and I could have this wrong, so if I've got this wrong, I apologize. But in theory, you can play this before you play more overloaded cards. But, at any rate, unless you need to kill something in a specific order on the board, you can always just play it last too. But unlocking your overloaded mana crystals is very, very cool. It's a very interesting mechanic. It suddenly makes things like Earth Elemental a lot more playable. Stuff like Lava Burst a lot more playable. So we could see some very bursty, spell-oriented control shamans used, I think, with this card, where you just sort of set up board control with a big taunt line with your removal, and then you're able to do a lot of direct damage to face with like Crackle, Lava Burst, things like that, and more spell powers. So it's going to be interesting to see what people do with Lava Shock. I'm very intrigued by this card. I think it's very cool. It's a very cool concept to play around with, so we'll see what people can come up with. Moving on to Warlock, Imp Gang Boss. It's all about the demons, man. 3 for a 2/4. Whenever this minion takes damage, summon a 1/1 imp. So at a 2/4, yeah, I think you're going to get some 1/1 imps. I think it's pretty obvious that this guy's going to be producing. It's a 1/1, so it's something that's easily removable. But with the demon synergy cards that exist, I think he could be quite good. Keep in mind that there's a card called Demon Fire that exists, which is do 2 damage to a non-demon or give one of your demons +2/+2. And so in that case, that might be a good flex card to include if you're going to play Imp Gang Boss and go for, a little bit quicker of a demon deck. And it just seems like Blizzard wants to give Warlocks more demon synergy specifically. They want to make Warlocks a more demon-focused class. So, this guy fits in quite well with that. So does the next card, 3 mana for Demon Wrath. Deal 2 damage to all non-demon minions. Did I call Flame Waker Flame Walker? I probably did. I've been doing that a lot. I just thought of that. Flame Waker is the mage card in case I called it wrong. Demon Wrath, yeah. Deal 2 damage to all non-demon minions. Again, I think this is pretty strong. It's like a mini Hellfire that doesn't hurt you. And in a demon deck, I think it's going to be pretty solid. So if you're playing a demon deck, I think we're going to see probably 1, maybe 2, but probably 1 included initially. I think would be a safe thing to try. Although I will say, when you're experimenting with a specific card in a deck, even if you only plan on putting 1 in, I always put 2 in when I'm testing, just so I have a higher chance to draw it, and so I get more situations where I'm using that card. So if you're going to experiment with it, just throw 2 in, see how it goes. You can always go down to 1 later, but the initial plan is to get yourself as much experience with the card in various situations as you can, right? So throw 2 in. Moving on to Warrior, yes, my favorite class in World of Warcraft and in Hearthstone, and some very exciting cards for Warrior. I'm thrilled, but maybe I'm biased. I'm definitely biased, but it's okay. Let's talk about it. 4 for a 2/5 Axe Flinger. Whenever this minion takes damage, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. Okay, cool. I like that. I like it with aggro, please, where I'm going to be using things like Unstable Ghoul, Whirlwind, Frothing Berserker, and just trying to pile the damage on. Charge, obviously, Warsong Commander. I think this guy could find a pretty solid place in a more aggressive warrior deck. I really feel like this set might be able to finally enable a very viable aggressive warrior deck. I'm hoping. I'm not sure, but I'm hoping. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. Obviously you can't target the damage, it doesn't go into minions, but you have so much removal as warrior anyway that I don't think it's going to be a big problem. I think you're going to want a lot of this damage from Axe Flinger to go to face anyway, so we'll see how it works out. And our final card in Blackrock Mountain, 2 mana for Revenge. Deal 1 damage to all minions. If you have 12 health or less, or 12 or less health, deal 3 damage instead. So is it an inefficient Whirlwind or is it a super Whirlwind? And it's interesting because as an inefficient play, as 2 mana for a Whirlwind basically, so paying twice as much, in that case, you're going to be having a lot of synergy with stuff like Axe Flinger, Unstable Ghoul, Armor Smith, Acolyte of Pain. So you're still going to be able to synergize well with what's on the board theoretically, even if you're not playing this card the most efficiently. So I don't think it's the worst to include. Doing 3 damage to all minions later on in the game, it's kind of like a please save me scenario sort of with Revenge. So if you're below 12 health, the game is probably too far out of reach for this card to save you. So I don't know. I mean, it's cool. It's a cool card. I like the concept behind it. If I'm gonna mess around with stuff that deals minions or does damage to minions, I might be considering playing around with Bouncing Blade again, especially with Axe Flinger. So, looking at Axe Flinger, looking at the other warrior cards, I'd actually be more inclined to bring back Bouncing Blade a bit than use Revenge. But I'm gonna still try it out a little bit. Again, at 2 mana, worst case scenario, it's not that bad if you have to play it inefficiently. So again, I don't think this one's going to see a ton of play, but it's worth a little bit of experimentation. And I think a lot of these cards, that's the nice thing about the set, is I think a lot of the cards, at the very least, are worth trying out, and they're worth kind of playing around with and seeing what you can come up with, which is the fun part of any new card set. So that is about it, I guess. Yeah, I don't know how long this was. long enough anyway. So a short talk about the new cards in Blackrock Mountain comes out tomorrow. A lot to think about. Feel free to leave your own comments in the YouTube comment section below. Let me know if you'd like me to go more in depth with something in the future, what you'd like to see from these videos. My overlay totally sucks, I know that. I just decided to get this done quickly. I haven't made a lot of content for YouTube in a long time, so sorry for that. But hope you liked it. If you do, subscribe to the Twitter, to the channel, all that good stuff to watch for more, because there will be a lot more coming in the near future. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. This is ggDoA, and I'll see you around.